All right, in this lesson, we're going to talk about coterminal angles on the unit circle. And the objective is to be able to identify positive and negative coterminal angles that are coterminal to a given angle, both in radians and degrees. So we're going to start with what is coterminal. So a coterminal angle just means the terminal side is the same. The initial side, remember, which is always on the positive x-axis, and the terminal side are the same. So if I draw in a line on the x-axis, that would be my initial side for both angles that I'm talking about. The terminal side could be anywhere. We're going to make it right here. Wait. Yeah, we're going to make it right there because we're talking about a 60-degree angle in our example. So that's about a 60-degree angle. Now, how do I find coterminal angles in the unit circle? Well, let's look at this. If from here to here is 60 degrees, that's 60 degrees. Oh, that's a 6 and that's a 0. 60 degrees. Forget it. I'm not even worried about it. What would a coterminal angle look like? Well, it's just an angle besides a 60-degree angle that's in the unit circle. So let's say I go around again. So I go around the circle a second time. So I'm going to start at this angle and go another 360 degrees around the circle. Well, now I've gone a total of 60 degrees, right? The initial piece that I did was 60 degrees. Then I went another 360 degrees. So really, I have gone a total of 360 plus 60, or 420 degrees. 360 plus 60 would be 420 degrees. So when you're looking for a coterminal angle, you're just going to add or subtract that 360 degrees. Well, what if I give you the angle in radians? Well, then you would just use 2 pi. We'll do that in the next slide. So for this one, to find the positive angle, we're going to add 360 degrees, which we just did. 60 plus 360 is 420. Why did I write 390? That should be 420. 420. Okay. And then what if I'm trying to find the negative angle? So let's start our drawing again. We'll just start all over. So now I'm going to start with my initial side on the x-axis, my terminal side at 60 degrees, and now I've gone 60 degrees. I've gone 60 degrees. Now what if I want a negative angle? Well, now I'm going to go backwards from here a negative 360 degrees. Remember, clockwise direction is negative. So this is negative 360, and I started at 60. So really it's going to be 60 minus 360 degrees. You're just going backwards, subtract 360. So 60 minus 360 would be a negative 300 degrees. So in other words, two angles that have the same terminal side would be 60 degrees and 420. Those are coterminal angles. And 60 degrees and negative 300 degrees are coterminal angles. So basically you're just going around more than once. You're going, remember, from 0 to 360 is one time around. So anything more than that or minus that would be you could find a coterminal angle by adding or subtracting 360. Now what if you get the angle in radians? Okay, so let's start with pi over 4. This one's talking about pi over 4. Oops. So we still start on our initial side, our positive x-axis, and then pi over 4, remember, is halfway through the first quadrant. Okay, so pi over 4, if I go in the positive direction, pi over 4 radians. Now what if I go around again? Well, that means I'm adding 2 pi, because one time around is 2 pi. Okay, so I want to do pi over 4 plus 2 pi. However, remember, when you have fractions, you have to have the common denominator. So we remember one time around is 2 pi radians. So to find the common denominator, I have to multiply by whatever's on the bottom of this one, because this is really 2 pi over 1. right? So we want to find the fraction with the same denominator as pi over 4, or whatever the angle you're given is. In this case, it's pi over 4. So honestly, all you're going to do is multiply this by whatever, 2 pi over 1, by whatever your denominator is. So notice, remember in the unit circle, we sometimes have a denominator of 3, sometimes we have a denominator of 4, sometimes we have a denominator of 6 for our radian angles. So if I want to convert this to an angle with the same, or to a angle with the same denominator as pi over 4, I'm just going to multiply by 4 over 4, and I'd get 8 pi over 4. If it was 6, I would multiply by 6 over 6. If it was 3, I'd multiply by 3 over 3. So now I have the quantity I need to use to add or subtract to my pi over 4 angle to get a positive angle in the unit circle. So if I want a positive angle, I'm going to add 8 pi over 4, which is equivalent to 2 pi, right? So I really want to add 8 pi over 4. So what's that going to look like? Well, I'm going to do pi over 4 plus 8 pi over 4. Remember, we add the numerators, and there's a 1 here that we can't see. There's a 1 in front of that pi. So it's really 1 pi plus 8 pi, which is 9 pi. That's a 1. And then when you add fractions, you keep the numerators the same once you have that common denominator. So the answer to this would be 9 pi over 4. So that means pi over 4 and 9 pi over 4 are coterminal angles. And then to find a negative angle, we just subtract, just like we were doing the 360. So you're going to subtract that 8 pi over 4. Subtract that 8 pi over 4. And that's going to look like this. So I have to do pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4. So that's a 1 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, which would give us negative 7 pi over 4. So that means pi over 4 and negative 7 pi over 4 are coterminal angles. Okay, so that's how you find any angles in the circle that are a positive or negative, that are coterminal to a given angle. What if the angle I'm given, I'm sorry, I'm not going to move on yet because I'm giving you a try it. So go ahead and stop the video and try these two problems. And when you're finished, go ahead and start again and we'll go over them. So let's say I give you the angle 190 and I want to find the positive angle. I'm going to add 360, I get 550, subtract 360, I get negative 170. The extra step here is just multiplying 2 pi over 1 by 6 over 6, so I would get 12 pi over 6. Then I add that to 5 pi over 6, and I get 17 pi over 6, and subtract it, and you get negative 7 pi over 6. I don't know why, sometimes it puts the line there and sometimes it doesn't, but I'm sure that's going to be alright. Okay, so next on our list is, or the last part of our lesson is to find an angle between 0 and 360, or between 0 and 2 pi radians. In other words, find an angle on the unit circle that doesn't go past 360 or 2 pi. That is coterminal with the given angle. So that means I'm looking at the angle 530 degrees. Well, that means I'm going to have to, since that's more than 360, I need to subtract 360 till I get an angle that's within this parameter, 0 to 360. You may have to do that more than once. In this case, I only had to do it once because I got 170, which is between 0 and 360 degrees. It's not necessarily one of the special angles that we look at on the unit circle, but it is between 0 and 360, so it is within those parameters. Now, what if I give you radians? Well, first I have to change this to 2 pi over 1, 2 pi over 1, times 3 over 3, so I'm going to get 6 pi over 3. And once you do that, you're going to subtract that from, because 17 pi over 3 is more than, notice 6 pi over 3 is one time around the unit circle. So one time around the unit circle is 6 pi over 3. This angle is more than that. So that means I'm going to subtract 6 pi over 3 from 17 pi over 3 till I get the angle that I want. Well, when I subtract it the first time, the angle I get is not on the unit circle yet. That's more than 6 pi over 3. So I have to do it again, and when I do it again, I get 5 pi over 3. So that would be your final answer, 5 pi over 3. The last one is a negative angle. Well, if I have a negative angle, that means I'm not going to subtract because that's less than 0. right? So it's not within my parameters. It's less than the 0. So I want to add until I get an angle on the unit circle. So the first time I add, I do get an angle that is within the parameters, so I can leave it at 150. Okay, so go ahead and stop the video and work and try the 3 try-it problems, and then come back and we'll go over them. All right, the first one, negative 135. Since that's less than 0, I have to add 360, I have to add 360, and I get 225 degrees. Negative 19 pi over 6. Well, let's convert 2 pi over 1. We already know 2 pi over 1 because we did it already, but that's times 6 over 6 since I have 6 in the denominator of my given angle. So it's 12 pi over 6. And this is less than 0. So I need to add 360 till I get an angle that's between 0 and 12 pi over 6. Or I need to add 12 pi over 6, I'm sorry. So the first time I add, I get negative 7 pi over 6. That is still negative, so I can't stop yet. So I'm going to add again, and I get 5 pi over 6, which is a positive angle. So that would be your final answer, 5 pi over 6. And then the last one, 800 degrees. That's more than 360, so I'm going to subtract, and I get 440, which is still more than 360. So I subtract again, and I get 80. So your final answer to that one would be 80 degrees. Okay, so you have 2 assignments for this lesson. One doing a maze finding coterminal angles for degrees, and one doing a maze finding coterminal angles for radians. Please make sure you show the work when you submit the assignment.